Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain had been falling all afternoon in downtown Austin, turning the sidewalks into mirrors of yellow light. Inside a small cafe called Vale Roasters, the air smelled of espresso and wet pavement. Ava Nguyen sat by the window, sketchbook open, headphones in, trying to ignore the stack of unpaid bills tucked inside her bag. Her hair was tied in a messy bun, and her paint-stained jacket made her look more like an art student than a professional illustrator. She had been hired to design a poster for the cafe's new charity program, and this was her last chance to prove herself before rent was due. Just as she reached for her cup, a man brushed past her table. He was tall, sharp-featured, and every bit the corporate-type tailored suit, leather watch, a calm that came from power. His name was Ethan Vale, the billionaire founder of Vale Roasters, though no one in the shop seemed to notice. He stopped near her table when a barista whispered something about a cancelled interview and a PR crisis. Ava barely looked up until a shadow fell over her sketchbook. "Excuse me," Ethan said, his voice even. "You designed this?" She blinked, startled. "Yes, it is for the charity event next month." He nodded once, studying the drawing of hands passing a cup of coffee between them. Then, as if deciding something on impulse, he sat down across from her. "I need your help," he said. "Not as an artist, but as a person." Ava frowned, unsure she had heard right. "Help you with what?" Ethan leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I need someone to pretend to be my fiancé." The words hit like a dropped glass. She almost laughed, waiting for the punchline, but he looked serious. "My board is demanding stability before the international merger. They want proof I am capable of commitment." "You want me to fake an engagement?" she asked, half whispering. "Why me?" "Because you are not part of my world," he said simply. "You are the only one who would not have a motive." Ava stared at him, caught between disbelief and fascination. He was a stranger, yet his tone carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. "You could ask anyone," she said quietly. "I just make coffee posters." "Exactly," Ethan replied. "You are invisible enough to make it believable." She shook her head, laughing nervously. "This is insane." "It is a business arrangement," he said, sliding a small card across the table. 6 weeks. No strings. In return, I will fund your entire art program." The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the glass. Ava's heart raced. Her mother's medical bills flashed in her mind, along with the eviction notice waiting at home. She picked up the card. "And after 6 weeks?" Ethan's eyes softened for the first time. "After 6 weeks, you walk away with your freedom. And I keep my company." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the hiss of the espresso machine and the thunder rolling above the city. Ava glanced down at her cup. His name, Ethan, was scribbled on the sleeve. She had picked up the wrong coffee earlier without realizing it. A strange twist of fate. Maybe that was how every deal began, with a mistake. She met his gaze again. "All right," she said finally. "But this stays professional." Ethan nodded once. "Agreed." When he stood, the light from the window caught the faintest smile on his face. "Welcome to the contract, Miss Nguyen." As he left, the doorbell chimed softly behind him. Ava sat frozen, staring at the rain, the name on the cup, and the card that could change everything. The next morning, Ava stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment, staring at the reflection of a woman who hardly looked like herself. The faint smell of coffee still clung to her jacket from yesterday's meeting. She had barely slept, replaying Ethan's proposal in her mind again and again. A fake engagement. 6 weeks. It sounded insane, yet the card with his signature was still on her nightstand, real and undeniable. The hospital had called earlier about her mother's upcoming treatment, and that reminder of reality had left her with no choice. Ava took a deep breath, slipped the card into her purse, and headed for Vale Roaster's downtown headquarters. The building was an ocean of glass and chrome, a world away from her messy studio. The receptionist greeted her by name, leading her to a private elevator. At the top floor, Ethan was waiting, standing beside a wide window overlooking the city. He turned as the doors opened. "You came," he said simply. "You sound surprised," Ava replied. "I am," Ethan admitted, his voice even but quieter than before. "Most people would have run." "I almost did," she said. "But I have my reasons." He nodded, gesturing toward a folder on the table. "This is the agreement. Review it carefully before signing." She flipped it open. The language was formal, sterile like a merger contract. Clause 1: the engagement would last 6 weeks. Clause 2: all appearances would be scheduled by his PR team. Clause 3: no personal interference in each other's lives. Clause 4: confidentiality required after termination. Ava looked up. "You have done this before, have you not?" "Never," Ethan said, meeting her eyes. "But I like order. I like rules." "Rules do not make people fall in love," she said softly. "That is why this is not about love," he replied. She studied him, his calm surface revealing nothing of what lay underneath. Finally, she signed. Her hand trembled only once. Ethan took the paper, folded it, and said, "We start tonight. There is a business gala. You will need a dress." "You are seriously turning me into your fiancé in one day?" she asked, half laughing. "That is the point," he said. "Convincing everyone it is real means we cannot look rehearsed." He handed her a small velvet box. Inside was a simple diamond ring. "It is not real," he added. "But it will photograph well." Ava turned the ring between her fingers. It sparkled against her skin, catching the sunlight that poured through the glass walls. She looked up. "What if I say something wrong?" "Then improvise," he said. "You are an artist. Pretend this is a performance." That evening, the lobby of the Grand Meridian Hotel was a constellation of lights and champagne laughter. Reporters lingered by the entrance as luxury cars rolled up to the red carpet. Ava stepped out of the black sedan wearing a soft champagne-colored gown that the stylist had chosen for her. Ethan offered his arm. Cameras flashed instantly. "Smile," he whispered. "You are the woman every reporter wants to know." Ava forced a polite smile, her heart pounding. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room. A journalist asked, "Mr. Vale, is this the mystery fiancé we have been hearing about?" Ethan smiled, the kind of smile that could freeze a crowd. "Yes," he said easily. "Ava Nguyen. The woman who made me believe in promises again." The room erupted with applause. Ava's breath caught. He had just said that as if it were real. He guided her through the crowd, his hand resting lightly on her back, steering her toward the stage. The world spun in a haze of flashbulbs and murmurs. When they finally reached the corner table, she exhaled, whispering, "That line about promises, was that in the script?" "No," Ethan said, watching her reaction. "That was the truth I wanted them to hear." She stared at him, unsure what startled her more, the conviction in his voice or the way her heart skipped in response. When he lifted his glass, toasting to the crowd, his fingers brushed hers for half a second. It was just an act, she reminded herself. But in that moment, surrounded by strangers and noise, it almost felt real. The next few days passed in a blur of fittings, rehearsals, and carefully orchestrated public appearances. Ava had never lived inside a schedule that precise. Every morning she was picked up by a black car, taken to the Vale Roaster's headquarters or a new event, and briefed by Ethan's assistant on what to say and what not to say. Every evening she returned to her apartment exhausted, still trying to remember which smile belonged to the cameras and which one belonged to herself. Ethan remained composed through it all, always polite, always distant. He handled reporters and investors as if they were parts of a machine that he alone understood. Yet sometimes, when the cameras were gone, she would catch him looking at her with something that almost resembled warmth. One afternoon, during a quiet photo shoot for a magazine, Ava stood by the window of Ethan's penthouse, wearing a pale blue dress. The stylist adjusted the light while the photographer called for one last shot. Ethan approached, standing just behind her. "You are doing well," he said quietly. "Better than you think." She turned slightly, surprised by his tone. "You sound almost sincere." He smiled faintly. "Do not tell the board. They prefer me robotic." "So I have noticed," she said. "Do you ever stop being the CEO?" "Not really," he admitted. "The company started in my parents' kitchen. My father roasted beans while my mother designed the first logo. After they died, this became my whole identity. If I stop being the CEO, I do not know who I am." His honesty disarmed her. For the first time, she saw more than the calculated businessman. She saw a man who had built his world from loss. "Maybe you just need someone to remind you," she said softly. The photographer interrupted, asking them to hold hands for the final shot. Ethan hesitated only a second before reaching for her fingers. His hand was warm, steady, and when the flash went off, neither of them looked away. That evening, they attended a dinner with potential investors. Ava's role was simple: smile, stay close, and confirm the illusion. Everything went smoothly until one of the investors, a silver-haired man named Mr. Daly, leaned forward and said, "Mr. Vale, I hope this engagement means you are finally settling down." Ethan nodded, keeping his tone light. "Stability is good for business." Daly laughed. "And for the heart. Tell me, Miss Nguyen, what was it that convinced you to say yes to a man like Ethan?" The table went silent. Ava's pulse raced. She had not been briefed for this question. She forced a smile. "He offered me coffee," she said. The guests chuckled, thinking it was a joke, but she continued. "He offered me warmth on a cold day, and I realized that sometimes love starts with something as small as a cup." For a moment, even Ethan seemed caught off guard. The laughter softened into applause, and the conversation moved on. Later, as they waited for the valet, Ethan glanced at her. That was not in the talking points. "You are welcome," she said. "It worked." "It did," he admitted, his voice slow. "You handled it better than most trained spokespeople." "Maybe because I am not trying to sell anything," she replied. "I am just trying to survive 6 weeks." They stood in silence as the city lights shimmered on the wet pavement. When the car arrived, Ethan opened the door for her. "You should know," he said before she stepped in, "the more real this looks, the harder it will be to walk away." Ava paused, meeting his gaze. "Then let us not make it look too real." But inside, she already felt the edges of the lie blur into something dangerously close to truth. As the car pulled away, she looked out the window at the skyline reflecting in the rain, wondering when pretending had started to feel like memory. By the second week, Ava's life no longer felt like her own. Her phone buzzed with daily schedules, her wardrobe was chosen by Ethan's stylist, and her name had begun to appear in business columns as the mysterious fiancé of the coffee mogul. She was supposed to feel proud, but mostly she felt lost. Between interviews, Ethan kept her close, always composed, always saying just enough to make their story believable. Yet the more perfect he acted, the more Ava began to notice the loneliness behind his charm. One morning, they rehearsed for a charity event in the Vale Roasters flagship store. The marketing team wanted a casual couple scene, something warm and spontaneous. Ava sat at a corner table while Ethan stood beside the espresso bar, explaining the significance of each blend to a nervous intern. When the cameras rolled, he joined her at the table, sliding a cup toward her. "Double ristretto, oat, extra hot," he said. "Your favorite." She blinked. "You remembered?" I pay attention, he said quietly. The camera caught her genuine smile, the first one in weeks. Later, when the shoot ended, Ethan loosened his tie and looked out the window. You did well today, he said. So did you, she replied. You almost looked human. He smirked. Almost. For a brief second, the tension between them softened. He asked if she wanted a ride home, and she agreed. The car glided through the late afternoon traffic, sunlight spilling across the dashboard. Ava watched the skyline blur past. Do you ever get tired of it? She asked suddenly. Being watched all the time? You get used to it, Ethan said. The world likes to see a version of you it can understand. The rest you keep hidden. And which version is this? She asked, turning toward him. The CEO or the man in the car? He paused, then said, maybe both. His honesty startled her again. They stopped at a red light. The city around them moved in slow motion, the pedestrians, the horns, the hum of traffic. Ethan looked at her, really looked, and for the first time Ava felt that the distance between their worlds could shrink. But the light turned green, and the moment passed. That night, Ava returned to her apartment and found an envelope under her door. Inside was a copy of a tabloid headline: Ethan Vale's fiancé's secret past. Is it all a PR move? Her stomach tightened. Someone had taken pictures of her sketching in a park, claiming she was an actress hired to fake love. She called Ethan immediately. Did you see this? Yes, he said calmly. Do not let it bother you. It will fade. It will not fade for me, she said, her voice shaking. This is my life, Ethan. My name. There was a pause on the line, then his voice softened. I will handle it. The next morning, the tabloids printed a follow-up: Ethan Vale defends fiancé, calls her the heart of his foundation. The statement came directly from his office. Ava read it twice, unsure how to feel. Gratitude, maybe. But also confusion. Later that evening, he appeared at her studio without warning. He looked tired, his sleeves rolled up, a coffee in hand. You should not have come here, she said. Someone will see you. Let them, he replied. I wanted you to know the truth. About what? About why I chose you, he said quietly. It was not random. I saw you months ago, at the Soho Cafe. You were sketching a woman holding a cup of coffee, and I thought, this is what my brand has lost. Humanity. You made me believe in it again. Ava's breath caught. He set the cup down between them. I did not plan to fall into this mess, he said. But every time you speak, people stop seeing a product and start seeing a person. The silence stretched until the air itself seemed to hum. Ava stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. You talk like you mean it. Maybe I do, Ethan said. But this was supposed to be pretend. She held his gaze, then said, maybe it stopped being pretend the day you remembered my coffee order. He smiled faintly, as if that truth scared him more than any headline. Outside, the city buzzed under the glow of streetlights, but inside that small studio, the space between them finally felt real. The following week, Ava and Ethan were scheduled to attend the largest corporate gala of the year, an event that would decide the future of Vale Roasters' international merger. For Ethan, it was business. For Ava, it felt like standing on a stage without a script. The press had been relentless since the rumor broke, and this night would either save their story or destroy it. When Ava arrived at the hotel ballroom, the chandeliers threw rivers of gold across the marble floor. She wore a sleek black gown, her hair swept into a soft wave that framed her face. The noise of laughter, glass, and camera shutters filled the air. Ethan met her near the entrance, dressed in a classic black tuxedo, every inch the composed billionaire the public adored. You look incredible, he said quietly, offering his arm. Remember, tonight we smile, we dance, and we make them believe. You do not have to remind me, Ava said, slipping her hand into his arm. I have been rehearsing for weeks. They walked into the ballroom together, flashes lighting up like stars. A reporter called out, "Mr. Vale, how does it feel to have your fiancé by your side tonight?" Ethan turned slightly toward Ava, his hand resting at her waist. "It feels right," he said smoothly. The crowd cheered, and for a moment the world seemed to accept their illusion. During dinner, they sat at the head table beside investors and board members. The conversation was formal, the atmosphere heavy with expectation. Ava smiled when required, answered questions with polite grace, and tried to ignore the knots in her stomach. Halfway through the meal, the host invited Ethan to the stage. He stood, adjusting his cufflinks before giving her a brief glance. "You will be fine," he whispered. Then he was gone, his presence replaced by the echo of applause. Ethan's speech began strong, calculated yet sincere, about growth, community, and rebuilding trust. But then, unexpectedly, he looked toward her and said, "Everything I have built would mean nothing without the person who reminded me that heart matters as much as profit. Ava Nguyen, you showed me that." The room erupted in applause again, cameras flashing like lightning. Ava's chest tightened. None of that was in the plan. When he returned to the table, she leaned closer and whispered, "Why did you say that?" "Because it is true," Ethan said simply. "You changed how I see my company, and maybe how I see myself." She wanted to reply, but before she could, a familiar voice cut through the noise. It was Mr. Daly, the investor from their earlier dinner. "That was quite a performance, Ethan," he said loudly, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Or should I say, quite an investment? How much does authenticity cost these days?" The table went silent. Ava froze. "Excuse me?" Ethan said evenly. Daly smirked. "Come on. Everyone knows this engagement is a publicity stunt. I wonder how long she will keep pretending for the right paycheck." The words sliced through the air like glass. Ava stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the marble floor. "You have no idea what you are talking about," she said. "I am not for sale." Daly shrugged. "Then you should stop acting like you are." Before Ethan could respond, Ava turned and walked out of the ballroom, her pulse pounding, her vision blurring with humiliation. Outside, the night was cold, the city lights spinning around her like broken reflections. A few reporters followed, shouting questions, but she kept walking until she reached the empty street. Moments later, Ethan's car pulled up beside her. He stepped out, still in his tuxedo, his expression unreadable. "Ava," he said softly. "Do not say it," she replied, her voice trembling. "Do not tell me it is just business. Not tonight." He exhaled, his breath clouding in the air. "I was going to say I am sorry." "Sorry will not fix what this is," she said. "You can stand in a room full of people and talk about love like it is a product, but you do not understand what it costs." She turned to leave, but he reached out, gently catching her wrist. "Then teach me," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, her heart aching. "Maybe I could have," she said. "If you had asked before all of this." Ava pulled her hand free and walked away, leaving Ethan standing alone in the glow of the streetlights, surrounded by the applause that still echoed faintly from inside the ballroom, applause that suddenly felt very far away. The morning after the gala, the city felt heavier than usual. The headlines were everywhere: "Fake fiancé walks out on billionaire Ethan Vale." Photos of Ava storming out of the ballroom splashed across every news site, her expression frozen between anger and heartbreak. In her small apartment, she sat on the couch with a cup of cold coffee, scrolling through comments that dissected her life like a public autopsy. Some called her brave. Most called her a fraud. Her phone buzzed again, another unknown number, another reporter asking for a quote. She threw the phone onto the couch and buried her face in her hands. A soft knock echoed from the door. For a moment, she thought it was the landlord, but when she opened it, Ethan stood there. The same tuxedo from last night, his tie gone, his eyes dark with exhaustion. "You should not be here," she said, her voice flat. "You made your statement, remember? You already defended me in the press." That was not for the press, he said quietly. That was for you. She crossed her arms. You have a strange way of showing that. He stepped inside without waiting for permission, setting a small paper bag on the counter. The smell of espresso and cinnamon filled the room. You have not eaten, he said. You do not know that, she muttered, but her stomach betrayed her with a low growl. He half smiled, pulling out 2 cups. Double ristretto, oat, extra hot. And 1 blueberry muffin. The last one they had. She stared at him, torn between fury and something softer. You think coffee can fix everything? No, he said. But it is where we started. Silence stretched between them. She finally sat down, taking a sip. The familiar taste hit her like a memory, warm and painful. Why are you really here, Ethan? She asked. The deal is over. The contract expired the moment I walked out. I know, he said. That is why I am here without a contract. Ava looked at him, eyes narrowing. Then what do you want? To tell you something I should have said a long time ago, he said. I did not ask you to pretend because I needed a fiancé, I asked you because I did not know how to be real anymore. I built everything in my life out of deals, out of logic and terms and signatures. Then you walked in and reminded me that not everything valuable can be negotiated. His voice cracked slightly, the first imperfection she had ever heard from him. When I saw you walk away last night, I realized I had lost the only thing that was not built for show. Ava blinked, her throat tightening. Do you expect me to believe that? I do not expect anything, he said. But I will prove it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It was the original engagement contract, torn cleanly down the middle. He placed it on the table. No more deals. No more pretending. She stared at the torn paper, unsure whether to laugh or cry. You are a stubborn man, she said finally. So I have been told, he replied, but maybe stubbornness is what it takes to make something real. She exhaled, setting her cup down. What happens now? Now, he said, I stopped trying to control the ending. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sunlight crept through the blinds, painting stripes of gold across the table. Ava looked at him, really looked, and saw a man stripped of armor for the first time. You know, she said softly, you are terrible at fake relationships. I am learning, he said, smiling faintly. Maybe you can teach me what a real one looks like. She shook her head but could not help the small smile that curved her lips. You might not like my methods. I already do, he said. She laughed quietly, a sound she had not made in days. Outside, the city kept moving, headlines kept spinning, but inside that small apartment, everything slowed to something human again. Ava leaned back, sipping her coffee, and for the first time since this began, it tasted exactly right. The next few days unfolded quietly, almost like the calm after a storm. The scandal that had once dominated every headline began to fade, replaced by newer stories and louder dramas. Ava returned to her art, sketching in her studio as sunlight filtered through the tall windows. The world outside kept moving, but inside, she found something close to peace. Ethan kept his distance, sending only one message each morning, a simple good morning, no pressure, no questions. It was strange how the silence between them no longer felt empty. One evening, as she was closing up the studio, she noticed a flyer slipped under the door. It was for a new exhibit at the Vale Foundation titled Art of Connection. The featured artist's name was hers. Shocked, she called the number at the bottom. Ethan Vale's office, said the voice on the line. Mr. Vale asked me to invite you personally to the opening this Friday. Her pulse quickened. I did not submit anything, she said. You did, the assistant replied. You just did not know it. When Ava arrived that Friday, the foundation's lobby was filled with soft jazz and the scent of roasted coffee. The walls were lined with her sketches, the ones she had drawn during the fake engagement. Each piece captured a fleeting moment: Ethan at the window, a coffee cup between them, a torn contract folded on a table. At the center stood the framed sleeve from the day they met, stained with that first mistaken sip. Ethan was waiting by it, dressed simply in a dark shirt and rolled sleeves, his posture uncertain for once. "You did this," she said, her voice trembling. "You took my drawings." "I borrowed them," he corrected gently. "And built this space for you. For the artists who feel unseen." "You had no right," she said, though her anger was tangled with disbelief. "Maybe not," he said. "But I had a reason. You told me once that art should belong to people, not walls. So I gave it back to them." He gestured around. Guests were walking through the gallery, smiling, pointing, seeing her work for the first time. "They know your name now, Ava. You are not invisible anymore." She turned toward the framed sleeve, her reflection shimmering on the glass. "Why would you do this?" "Because you reminded me what authenticity looks like," he said. "And because I needed to earn your forgiveness, not buy it." The music faded, replaced by applause as the lights dimmed and the host took the stage to thank the artist of the evening, Ava Nguyen. She felt a lump in her throat as she looked back at Ethan. "You did not have to do this," she whispered. "I did," he replied. "It was the only way I could prove I meant every word I said." For a long moment, they stood there in the glow of the gallery lights, surrounded by her art and the echo of their story. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "Maybe this time," she said, "we start without a contract." Ethan smiled, eyes warm and unguarded. "Maybe this time, we just start." And for the first time, Ava believed him. The following weeks unfolded like a quiet sunrise, slow but steady, each day carrying a new rhythm neither of them had expected. Ethan began stopping by Ava's studio in the mornings, sometimes bringing coffee, sometimes just sitting quietly while she worked. The tension that once filled every space between them had been replaced by something gentler, something that felt almost fragile. One morning, as Ava brushed light strokes of color across a new canvas, she asked without looking up, "Do you ever miss the noise? The chaos of all that power and pressure?" Ethan leaned against the doorway, his sleeves rolled, his voice thoughtful. "Sometimes, but then I remember this." He nodded toward the sunlight spilling across her paint-splattered floor. "This silence has more meaning than any boardroom I have ever been in." Ava smiled faintly. "You sound like an artist now." "Maybe I am learning," he said. "You taught me that creation and control cannot live in the same room." They shared a quiet laugh, one that seemed to belong entirely to them. Later that week, Ava was invited to speak at a community art event hosted by the Vale Foundation. It was her first public talk, and she was nervous. Ethan insisted on sitting in the back row, out of sight, letting her have the moment for herself. When she stepped onto the small stage, she took a deep breath and said, "Art saved me more than once. It gave me a voice when I felt invisible. And sometimes, when we meet the right person, they become part of that art whether we mean for it or not." Her gaze flicked toward Ethan for a brief second, and though he remained still, a small, proud smile tugged at the corner of his lips. After the event, as the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, Ethan approached her quietly. "You were brilliant," he said. "You made every word sound like truth." "It was truth," she replied softly. "Every piece of it." He reached into his pocket, pulling out something small, a simple gold ring, elegant but unassuming. "This time there is no contract, no cameras, and no one watching," he said. "Just a man who has finally learned how to mean what he says." Ava stared at the ring, her heart hammering in her chest. "Ethan," she whispered, "you do not have to." "I know," he said. "That is why it matters." The air between them felt electric, but calm, like the final note of a long song. She hesitated, then reached for his hand. "If I say yes," she said quietly, "I am saying yes, to all of the chaos, the silence, and the learning." Ethan nodded, his eyes locked on hers. "Then let us learn together." She smiled through the blur of tears she did not expect, slipping the ring onto her finger. The fit was perfect, not because it was expensive, but because it felt earned. In that moment, surrounded by the faint hum of the empty hall, Ava realized that sometimes the truest promises are not written, or signed, or sealed. They are lived, one quiet morning at a time, and as they stepped out into the cool evening air, hand in hand, it no longer felt like the end of a contract, but the beginning of something real. Months later, the world had changed quietly around them. The scandal that once defined their names was long forgotten, replaced by stories of community programs, artist scholarships, and a new line of sustainable coffee shops under the Vale Roasters name. But behind all of it, what mattered most was the life they were quietly building together. On a bright Saturday morning, Ava stood inside their shared cafe studio, hanging a new painting on the wall. It was a large canvas, painted in warm tones of cream and gold, showing two hands passing a coffee cup across a table. The piece was titled, Promise. Ethan entered a few moments later, carrying a tray with two steaming cups. Double ristretto, oat, extra hot, he said. And one with too much sugar for you. She turned, smiling at him. You still remember. How could I forget, he said. That was the mistake that started everything. They sat together at the small table by the window, the same way they had the day they met. Outside, the morning light shimmered through the glass, painting soft patterns across the wooden floor. Ava took a slow sip, her eyes thoughtful. Do you ever think about how strange it all was? She asked. A fake engagement, a broken contract, and somehow this. Ethan chuckled. It does sound impossible. But then again, most of the best things in life start that way. He reached across the table, brushing his thumb against her hand. If I had to go through it all again to find this, I would. She looked at him for a long moment before saying, You are still terrible at pretending. He laughed softly. Good. I never want to pretend again. The cafe door opened as a couple of young artists walked in, admiring the paintings on the wall. One of them pointed to the framed cup sleeve near the counter, the very one from their first meeting, still faintly stained with coffee. Is that real? The girl asked. Ava smiled. Yes, she said. Every story starts with something real, even when it looks like a mistake. As the couple left, Ethan leaned closer and said, You realize you just told them our entire love story. It is not a secret anymore, she replied. It is art now. He nodded, looking around the cafe filled with laughter, color, and the smell of fresh espresso. You turned my business into something human, he said softly. No, Ava said. We turned it into home. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that needed no words. Then, as sunlight poured through the window, Ethan lifted his cup. To new beginnings, he said. To promises kept, Ava answered, clinking her cup against his. The sound was soft, like the start of another morning. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that inside a small cafe, two people who once built their love on a contract had learned how to build it on truth. And for them, that was all that mattered, a lifetime promise made not with ink, but with heart.